The courtroom in Memphis, Tennessee, hummed with the low buzz of anticipation. It was a muggy July afternoon in 2025, the kind where the air clung to your skin like a second shirt. Ceiling fans spun lazily overhead, doing little to cut the heat. Lieutenant Daniel Hargrove, a broad-shouldered white man with a buzz cut and a permanent sneer, slouched in the witness stand. His blue uniform was crisp, his badge glinting under the fluorescent lights, a symbol of the invulnerability he wore like armor. Across the room stood a young black woman, petite, maybe 30, her hair pulled back in a tight bun, her plain gray dress unremarkable. She looked like someone who'd wandered into the wrong place, a nobody caught in a minor drug bust. Hargrove thought so too. "Sweetheart," he drawled, his voice loud enough to ripple through the gallery. "You really think you're gonna talk your way out of this? I've seen a dozen like you this week, same story, same lies." The judge, a tired-looking man with graying hair, tapped his gavel half-heartedly. But Hargrove didn't flinch. He leaned forward, smirking. "What's it this time?" "I didn't know the bag was there." "Save it for someone who cares." The woman didn't react. Her face stayed calm, almost too calm, her dark eyes locked on him, like she was studying a bug under glass. The courtroom shifted uncomfortably. Some snickered, others frowned, but Hargrove reveled in it. He'd been a cop for 15 years, a lieutenant for 3, and in his mind, he owned this city. Memphis was his turf, and no one, especially not some girl who looked like she couldn't afford a lawyer, was going to challenge that. The trial dragged on, a slow grind of routine questions and Hargrove's relentless jabs. The prosecutor, a wiry man with glasses perched on his nose, shuffled papers, asking about the night of the arrest, a small stash of pills found in a car, the woman's name listed as Jane Doe on the report. Hargrove leaned into the mic, his voice dripping with mockery. "She was sitting there, looking all innocent, like she didn't know a thing. I told her, darling, you're not fooling nobody. Caught her red-handed, plain as day." The woman stood at the defense table, hands clasped in front of her, still silent. Her lawyer, a public defender with a rumpled suit and a nervous tic, fumbled through objections, but Hargrove steamrolled him. "You think this kid's gonna save you?" he snorted, nodding at the lawyer. "Good luck, honey. You're going down, and I'll be the one locking the door." A few chuckles echoed from the back of the room, his buddies from the precinct, no doubt. The judge sighed, rubbing his temples, but didn't intervene. Under the table, her fingers twitched, just once. A flicker of something crossed her face, gone as quick as it came. Hargrove didn't notice. He was too busy basking in the sound of his own voice, recounting the arrest with exaggerated flair. "She tried to run, thought she could outsmart me. Me. I had her pinned in 10 seconds flat," he grinned, teeth flashing, oblivious to the shift in the air. The gallery was quieter now, the snickers fading. Something felt off, but Hargrove was too deep in his own story to care. Then she spoke. Her voice was low, steady, cutting through the room like a blade. "Lieutenant Hargrove, are you finished?" It wasn't loud, but it landed like a thunderclap. Heads turned. Hargrove blinked, caught off guard, then laughed, a sharp, barking sound. "Oh, she talks!" "She? What's that, sugar? You got something to say before they cart you off?" She tilted her head, just slightly. "I'd like to ask you a question, if I may." The judge raised an eyebrow, but nodded. Hargrove shrugged, still grinning. "Go ahead, darling. Make it quick." "When you arrested me," she said, her tone measured, "did you check my identification?" Hargrove faltered, just for a second. "Didn't need to. You were in the car, drugs were there, open and shut. What's your point?" Her lips curved, not quite a smile. "My point," she said, "is that you might have missed something important." The courtroom air thickened, the hum of the fans suddenly louder in the silence that followed her words. Hargrove's grin froze, then twisted into a scowl. "Missed something?" he snapped, leaning forward on the stand. "I don't miss nothing, sweetheart. You were in that car. I saw you. I nabbed you. End of story. His voice carried that same brash edge, but there was a flicker in his eyes, something uneasy. The woman didn't flinch. She stepped forward, her plain gray dress catching the light, and reached into a small satchel at the defense table. The public defender shot her a confused glance, but she ignored him. "Your Honor," she said, her voice still calm, "may I approach the witness?" The judge hesitated, then nodded, curiosity etching lines into his tired face. Hargrove snorted as she walked closer, his arms crossing defiantly. "What's this? You gonna pull a rabbit out of that bag? Go on, then entertain me." The gallery tittered, but it was thinner this time, uncertain. She stopped a few feet from him, holding a slim leather wallet. "You said you didn't check my ID," she continued, flipping it open with a practiced flick. The glint of a badge caught the light, gold official, unmistakable. "So you wouldn't have seen this." The room stilled. Hargrove's smirk vanished, his eyes narrowing as he squinted at the badge. "What the hell's that supposed to be?" he growled, but his voice had lost some of its bite. He shifted in his seat, the wood creaking under him. "It's my identification," she said simply. "Nia Carter, Inspector General of the Federal Police." A murmur rippled through the courtroom, sharp and electric. The prosecutor's glasses slipped down his nose as he gaped. The judge sat up straighter, his gavel forgotten. Hargrove's face went slack, then flushed red. "Bullshit," he spat, loud enough to echo. "You're no Fed. You're a damn liar trying to weasel out of this." But his hands gripped the edge of the stand, knuckles whitening. He glanced at his buddies and the back two uniformed cops, who'd gone stone-faced, avoiding his eyes. Nia Carter tilted her head again, that same almost smile playing on her lips. "You're certain of that, Lieutenant? You've been so sure of everything today? My guilt, my story, my place. Tell me, what made you so confident I was just some girl you could mock?" Hargrove opened his mouth, then shut it. The room was watching him now, every eye await. I don't got to answer to you," he stammered, but it sounded weak, hollow. "You're under arrest. You don't get to play games." "Am I?" she asked, stepping closer. "Or were you so busy assuming you knew me that you missed the bigger picture?" She turned to the judge. "Your Honor, this case isn't what it seems. I was in that car on assignment undercover, investigating corruption in the Memphis PD. Lieutenant Hargrove's unit, specifically." The gallery erupted, voices overlapping in a chaotic swell. The judge banged his gavel, shouting for order, but Hargrove was already on his feet, face a mask of fury. "You're setting me up," he roared. "This is a goddamn frame job." The gavel cracked again, sharper this time, as the judge bellowed, "Order! Sit down, Lieutenant!" Hargrove froze mid-rant, chest heaving, then sank back into the witness stand, his glare locked on Nia Carter. The courtroom buzzed like a hive, whispers darting between spectators, but Nia stood unmoved, her badge still in hand, its weight silencing the room more than the judge's command. "Your Honor," she said, turning smoothly, "I'd like to submit evidence to clarify my presence in this case and Lieutenant Hargrove's actions." She pulled a thin folder from her satchel, handing it to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. Hargrove's eyes tracked it, his jaw tightening. "This includes surveillance logs, audio from my undercover op, and incident reports that contradict the lieutenant's testimony." Hargrove slammed a fist on the stand. "That's fabricated." "She's lying through her teeth. This is a setup." His voice cracked, desperation seeping in. The judge didn't look at him, his glasses perched low as he scanned the documents. The prosecutor, now pale, flipped through his own notes, as if searching for an escape hatch. "Lieutenant," Nia said, her tone cool but piercing, "you've spent this trial calling me a liar, a criminal, a nobody. You mocked me every chance you got. Why? What about me made you so sure I couldn't be more?" Hargrove's mouth twisted, but he didn't answer. His earlier swagger was gone, replaced by a cornered animal's snarl. The gallery leaned in, breath held, as the judge cleared his throat. Ms. Carter, if that's who you are, this is highly irregular. Why weren't we informed of your status? Because I needed to see this through, she replied, glancing at Hargrove. I've been tracking corruption in his unit for months. Extortion, planted evidence, brutality. This arrest was my chance to test how far he'd go. He didn't disappoint. She paused, letting the words sink in. He assumed I was powerless because of how I look young, black, female. He didn't even check my ID. That's the pattern I'm here to expose. The judge frowned, flipping another page. These recordings, where'd they come from? My wire, Nia said. I was wearing it during the arrest. You'll hear Lieutenant Hargrove boasting about teaching me a lesson, his words. There's more too. Names, dates, payoffs his unit's been running. Hargrove lunged forward again, stopped by the bailiff's hand on his shoulder. She's making this up. You can't trust her. She's playing you all. But his voice trembled now, and his buddies in the back were slipping toward the exit, heads down. The judge held up a hand. Enough. We'll recess to review this evidence. Ms. Carter, you'll remain in custody until we verify your claims. Lieutenant, you're off the stand. Don't leave the building. The gavel fell, and the room exploded into chaos, reporters scrambling, spectators shouting, Hargrove cursing under his breath as he was escorted out. Nia didn't move, her gaze steady, as deputies cuffed her wrists, a formality she knew. She'd expected this. As they led her away, she caught Hargrove's eye one last time. He glared back, but there was fear there now, raw and unmasked. The holding cell was a concrete box, its fluorescent light buzzing like a trapped fly. Nia Carter sat on the metal bench, wrists still cuffed, her gray dress wrinkled but her posture straight. Outside, the courthouse-churned reporters swarmed the steps, their cameras flashing, while inside, the judge's chambers hummed with hushed arguments. Hargrove was somewhere down the hall, pacing in a room of his own, his career teetering on a knife's edge. A deputy lingered by the cell door, a young guy with a buzz cut and a nervous frown. You really the Inspector General? He asked, voice low, like he didn't want the walls to hear. Nia glanced at him, her expression unreadable. What do you think? He shifted his weight, chewing his lip. I don't know. Hargrove's been running things around here forever. He's loud, sure, but people listen. You don't look like you'd be in charge of anything. She nodded, almost to herself. That's what he thought too. The deputy blinked, then turned away, muttering something about paperwork. Nia leaned back against the wall, closing her eyes. She'd known this would happen, knew the cuffs, the doubt, the sideways glances were part of the game. Months of undercover work had led her here, peeling back the rot in Hargrove's unit. Cops shaking down dealers, pocketing cash, planting drugs to pad their stats. She'd seen it all, recorded it all. But Hargrove's arrest of her rough, sloppy gleeful had been the unexpected gift. His arrogance was her leverage. Down the hall, Hargrove slammed a fist against a table, his voice carrying through the walls. They're buying her act. That bitch set me up. She's been planning this. His lawyer, a balding man in a cheap suit, tried to calm him, but Hargrove wasn't hearing it. I'm not going down for this. I've got dirt on half the precinct. They'll back me up. In the judge's chambers, the evidence was spreading like wildfire. The audio from Nia's wire played on a laptop. Hargrove's voice, brash and unmistakable. Little thing like you needs to learn her place. We run this town, not you. Then the crunch of gravel, her sharp intake of breath as he shoved her against the car. The judge's face darkened with every word. The prosecutor, sweating now, stammered about procedure, but the federal badge in the folder stared back, unyielding. An hour later, the courtroom reconvened. Nia was led back in, cuffs off now, her satchel returned. Hargrove sat at the prosecution table, his tie loose, eyes darting like a trapped rat. The judge cleared his throat. Ms. Carter's identity has been confirmed, She is, in fact, the Inspector General of the Federal Police. This trial is suspended pending a full investigation into Lieutenant Hargrove's conduct and his unit. The gallery gasped, a wave of sound crashing over the room. Hargrove shot to his feet. "This is a witch hunt! She's playing you! She's the criminal here!" But the bailiff was already moving, and the judge's gavel silenced him. Nia stepped forward, her voice cutting through the din. "Your Honor, this isn't just about one arrest. It's about a system that lets men like him thrive, men who see people like me and assume we're nothing. I have more evidence, more recordings. This doesn't end here." Hargrove lunged, stopped by two deputies. "You're dead for this," he snarled, spit flying. "You hear me? Dead!" The judge banged the gavel harder. "Take him out, now!" The courthouse doors swung shut behind Hargrove as deputies hauled him into a back room, his shouts fading into muffled echoes. The gallery emptied in a rush, reporters sprinting for their vans, phones pressed to ears, while onlookers lingered, whispering theories. Nia Carter stood alone at the defense table, packing her satchel with deliberate calm. The public defender hovered nearby, still dazed. "You could have told me," he muttered, scratching his neck. "Would you have believed me?" she asked, not looking up. He didn't answer. Outside, Memphis simmered under a graying sky, the Mississippi River's humid breath curling through the streets. Nia stepped onto the courthouse steps, the flash of cameras blinding her for a moment. Questions flew. "Inspector General, what's next? Is Hargrove finished? How deep does this go?" But she kept walking, her face a mask of quiet resolve. She'd ignited a fire, and it was spreading faster than she'd planned. Back at the precinct, Hargrove's allies were scrambling. Two sergeants, Burke and Tanner, thick-necked veterans who'd laughed in the gallery, huddled in a break room, coffee cups forgotten. "She's got tapes," Burke growled, cracking his knuckles. "How the hell did she get that close?" "Doesn't matter," Tanner said, voice low. "Hargrove's toast, but we're not. We clean this up, find her source, bury it. She's one woman." Burke smirked. "One woman with a badge. You saw her. She's not scared. That's trouble." Across town, Nia slipped into a nondescript sedan. Her driver, a stone-faced, fed in a black suit. "They'll come for you," he said, eyes on the rear view. "Hargrove's got friends, cops, dealers, even a councilman or two." "I know," she replied, staring out the window. "That's why I'm not done." Night fell, and the city pulsed with unease. Hargrove, released on bail after a frantic call from his lawyer, stormed into a dive bar on Beale Street, the neon buzzing overhead. His uniform was gone, swapped for a stained hoodie, but his rage burned bright. "She thinks she's untouchable," he muttered to a shadowed figure at the bar. Councilman Reed, a wiry man with slick hair and a nervous tic. "I'll show her." Reed sipped his whiskey, glancing around. "You're hot, Dan. Lay low. She's got the feds behind her." "She's got nothing," Hargrove snapped. "I've been running this game too long. She's bluffing with those tapes. We hit back hard." Meanwhile, Nia sat in a safe house, a laptop glowing in the dim room. Files scrolled across the screen, names, dates, payments linking Hargrove's unit to a web of corruption stretching beyond Memphis. She paused on a photo. Hargrove shaking hands with Reed, a duffel bag at their feet. Her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "You're digging too deep. Walk away." She set it down, unfazed. The threat was expected, almost comforting. It meant she was close. By morning, the news broke. Memphis PD rocked by corruption probe. Hargrove's face splashed across screens, Nia's name a quiet footnote for now. But the city was splitting open, old wounds bleeding fresh. Protests flared downtown, signs reading "Justice for All" clashing with blue line flags waved by Hargrove's supporters. The precinct was a fortress, cops circling wagons, while Nia's team moved in shadows, gathering more. Hargrove, holed up in his apartment, loaded a pistol, his hands shaking. "She wants a war," he muttered. She'll get one. The Memphis skyline glowed faintly, through a haze of humidity and streetlights. The city, restless as midnight approached. Nia Carter sat in the safe house, her laptop now joined by a stack of printouts. Bank records, encrypted emails, a map of Hargrove's known haunts marked in red. Her driver, Agent Mills, stood by the window peering through blinds. "They're moving," he said, voice tight. "Word's out, Hargrove's rallying his crew. You've got him spooked." "Good," Nia replied, circling a name on the map, Beale Street Bar. Spooked men make mistakes. Outside, the protests had quieted, but the tension lingered like smoke. Social media buzzed with hashtags, "More Justice for Memphis," "Shanja," "Blue Line Strong," each side digging in. Nia's reveal in court had cracked the city's fed, and now the fault lines were showing. Her phone buzzed again. "Last chance. Back off or you're done." She deleted it, her jaw set. Across town, Hargrove hunched in his apartment, the pistol still in hand. His phone lit up with texts. Burke and Tanner confirming they'd rounded up a dozen loyalists. Off-duty cops willing to fix this. Councilman Reed had slipped him a burner phone and a promise. "Handle her, and I'll handle the fallout." Hargrove's eyes gleamed, wild and unhinged. "She's not taking me down," he muttered, grabbing his keys. "Not some nobody who got lucky." He met his crew in a warehouse off the river, the air thick with rust and diesel. 12 men, some in hoodies, others still in half uniforms, circled around. Burke cracked open a beer, smirking. "What's the play, boss? She's got feds, can't just walk up and pop her." "We don't," Hargrove said, voice low. "We hit her where it hurts her case. Find her stash, her backups, torch it. She's got no evidence, she's got no power." He tapped the burner phone. "Reed's got a guy who tracked her car safe house on the east side. We move tonight." When back at the safe house, Nia sensed the shift. Mills stiffened by the window. Headlights, 2 blocks out. Black SUV, no plates. She closed the laptop, sliding it into her satchel. "They're early," she said, almost to herself. "Get the team on standby." Mills nodded, radio crackling as he called in backup. Nia pulled a small recorder from her pocket, double-checking it, her insurance policy, packed with months of audio. She'd known Hargrove wouldn't fold quietly. Men like him never did. The SUV slowed a block away. Lights off now, shadows spilling out onto the street. The first crash came at 1:14 a.m. Glass shattering downstairs. Mills drew his gun. But Nia held up a hand. "Wait." Footsteps thudded below. Voices barking orders, Hargrove's, loudest of all. "Find her stuff. Tear it apart." A second crash, then the smell of smoke. They were burning the decoy files she'd left in the kitchen, useless papers meant to buy time. Nia pressed record on her device, slipping it into her sleeve. "Let's move," she whispered. Mills led her to a back stairwell, the safe house's layout memorized weeks ago. Outside, sirens wailed in the distance, her team closing in. But Hargrove's men were fast, fanning out, one spotting the stairwell door. "Up there!" Tanner yelled, boots pounding after them. The chase spilled into an alley, Nia's breath steady despite the chaos. Mills fired a warning shot, scattering 2 of Hargrove's crew, but the lieutenant himself barreled forward, pistol raised. "You're mine!" he roared, face twisted with fury. Nia ducked behind a dumpster as a bullet sparked off the brick wall, inches from her head. Mills tackled Hargrove, the gun skidding across the pavement. Nia grabbed it, standing over them as sirens screamed closer. "It's over, Daniel," she said, voice cutting through the night. "You're done." He spat at her feet, blood trickling from his nose. "You think this ends it? There's more like me everywhere. You'll see." The alley pulsed with red and blue lights as federal agents swarmed in, their shouts overlapping with the clatter of cuffs, snapping onto Hargrove's wrists. He thrashed against Mills and 2 others, his hoodie torn, his voice a raw snarl. "You're nothing, you hear me? Nothing." Nia stood back, the pistol still in her hand until an agent took it. Her eyes locked on Hargrove as they dragged him to a van. His words hung in the air. More like me everywhere. A taunt, a truth, a challenge. Tanner and Burke were rounded up nearby, their bravado gone, heads bowed, as they were shoved into another vehicle. The warehouse fire flickered in the distance, a plume of smoke curling over the riverfront, drawing a crowd of onlookers with phones raised. Nia slipped the recorder from her sleeve, handing it to Mills. "Everything's on there," she said. His voice, their plans, enough to bury them. Mills nodded, grim. "And then some. Reed's next his prints are all over this." He paused, glancing at her. "You okay?" She didn't answer right away, her gaze drifting to the growing chaos sirens, shouts. The city waking to its own reckoning. "I will be," she said finally, turning away. By dawn, the safe house was a crime scene, cordoned off with yellow tape. Nia sat in a federal field office downtown, a cup of coffee cooling in her hands as she briefed her team. The laptop had survived, its files intact, hundreds of pages linking Hargrove's unit to a network of corruption, payoffs from dealers, protection rackets, even ties to a smuggling ring across state lines. Her undercover months had paid off, but Hargrove's arrest was just the first domino. The news hit like a shockwave. Memphis PD lieutenant charged in federal sting scrolled across screens, Nia's face now public alongside grainy footage of the alley takedown. Protests reignited, louder now, some cheering her name, others decrying a rigged system. Hargrove's supporters rallied too, a knot of blue-clad figures outside the precinct, their signs defiant. Back the badge. The city was a tinderbox, and Nia had struck the match. She left the office at noon, stepping into a humid drizzle that slicked the streets. Her phone buzzed, another threat. This one a grainy photo of her leaving court, a red X scrawled over her face. She deleted it, her stride unbroken. Mills caught up, falling in step. "You're a target now," he said. "They won't stop." "They never do," she replied, voice steady. "That's why I won't either." Days bled into weeks. Hargrove's trial loomed, a media circus that drew national eyes. The evidence piled up: tapes, witnesses, a councilman flipping under pressure. But so did the backlash. Anonymous letters flooded Nia's office, some pleading for justice, others promising revenge. One night, a brick shattered her apartment window, a note taped to it. "You can't win." She swept up the glass, her hands steady, and kept working. The final court date arrived, a gray November morning. Hargrove sat in the defendant's chair, thinner now, his sneer replaced by a hollow stare. Nia took the stand, her gray dress swapped for a sharp blazer, her badge pinned proudly. She recounted the arrest, the taunts, the years of rot she'd uncovered, not just in Memphis, but in cities nationwide. "Racism isn't loud every time," she said, her voice clear. "Sometimes it's a laugh in a courtroom, an assumption you don't belong. It's everywhere still. But so am I." The jury convicted Hargrove guilty on corruption, assault, conspiracy. Sentencing was set for spring, but the courtroom didn't cheer. The weight of her words lingered, heavy and unresolved. As Nia left, a young black girl in the gallery met her eyes, a shy smile breaking through. Nia nodded back, a silent promise. Outside, the rain had stopped. She walked alone, the city sprawling before her, fractured, alive, uncertain. Hargrove was down, but his warning echoed, "More like me." She knew it was true. The fight wasn't over. It never would be. But as she disappeared into the crowd, her satchel slung over her shoulder, the horizon shimmered with something like hope. Or maybe just the next battle waiting to begin. The weeks after Hargrove's conviction blurred into a tense rhythm for Nia Carter. Memphis didn't heal, it festered. The precinct shuffled leadership, suspending half a dozen officers tied to Hargrove's schemes. But whispers of loyalty to him lingered in locker rooms and back alleys. Nia's office became a bunker, her team sifting through tips, some solid, most frantic about retaliation brewing. Her apartment stayed dark, a new safe house her temporary home, its address known only to Mills and a handful of feds. One evening, as dusk painted the city in bruised purples, Nia sat at a scarred wooden table, a burner phone in hand. A contact, an ex-cop turned whistleblower, had texted coordinates. A derelict lot near the river, a meet set for midnight. "They're planning something big," the message read. "Hargrove's still pulling strings." She showed it to Mills, who frowned. "Could be a trap." "Could be," she said, standing. "But we're running out of time." They drove in silence, the sedan's headlights off as they neared the lot, a sprawl of cracked concrete and rusted shipping containers. Nia wore a black jacket over her blazer, the recorder back in her sleeve. Mills parked a block away, scanning the shadows. "I'll cover you," he said, hand on his holster. She nodded, stepping out into the damp night. The whistleblower waited by a container. A wiry man named Ellis, his face half lit by a cigarette's glow. "You're late," he rasped, flicking ash. "They're moving tonight. Hargrove's boys plus some new blood. Word is, they're hitting the evidence lockup downtown. Your tapes, your files gone by morning." Nia's pulse quickened, but her voice stayed level. "Who's leading it?" "Burke's out on bail," Ellis said. "Got a crew 5, maybe 6. They think if they burn your case, Hargrove walks on appeal." He hesitated, eyes darting. "Reed's bankrolling it. He's scared you've got more on him." She nodded, processing. "Where's the lockup strike happening?" "Old warehouse on Front Street, 2 a.m. They've got a mole inside feeding 'em codes." Ellis stubbed out his cigarette. "That's all I've got. I'm out. Reed's got eyes everywhere." Before she could press him, a crack split the air, a gunshot. Close. Ellis dropped, blood blooming on his chest. Nia dove behind the container as Mills shouted, returning fire into the dark. Tires screeched, a pickup peeling out, shadows scattering. She crawled to Ellis, checking his pulse gone. Mills grabbed her arm. "We're blown, move!" They sprinted to the car, bullets pinging off metal as they peeled away. Nia's mind raced Burke, Reed, a mole. The evidence lockup was her lifeline, the backbone of her case. "Get the team," she told Mills, breathless. "We hit Front Street first." The clock ticked past 1 a.m. as Nia's Squad 8 agents, armed and silent, converged on the warehouse. It loomed against the river, a hulking shell of brick and steel. They breached the back, finding the mole, a jittery clerk, cuffed to a chair, confessing through tears. "Burke made me," he sobbed. "They're already inside." A crash echoed from the storage bays. Gasoline fumes hit the air. Nia led the charge, her team fanning out. Burke stood by a stack of crates, a lighter in hand, grinning as flames licked the edges. "Too late, princess," he taunted, tossing the lighter. Fire roared up, swallowing files. But Nia didn't flinch. She tackled him, pinning him as Mills doused the blaze with an extinguisher. The tapes, her originals, were safe in the safe house. These were backups, a calculated risk. Burke laughed, bloodied but defiant. "You think this stops us? Hargrove's a symbol. You'll never kill the idea." She stood, letting agents cuff him. "Maybe not," she said, "but I'll keep fighting it." Dawn broke over a smoldering scene. Burke in custody, the mole spilling names, Reed's empire cracking. Nia walked away, the city waking around her. Protests still simmered, threats still came, but that girl's smile from the courtroom flickered in her mind. The war wasn't won. Hargrove's shadow loomed, his allies waited. Yet as she vanished into the morning mist, her steps echoed with purpose, leaving the question hanging. How far could one woman push against a world that refused to change? The warehouse smoldered as Nia stepped into the gray light of morning, the acrid sting of smoke clinging to her jacket. Sirens wailed in the distance, a familiar soundtrack to a city teetering on edge. Burke's taunt, "You'll never kill the idea," rang in her ears, a bitter truth she couldn't shake. She'd won the night, saved enough evidence to keep Hargrove's conviction intact, But the cost was etched in the lines of her face. Ellis dead, her team battered, and Memphis still a powder keg. Mills caught up, his suit dusted with ash. "Reed's in the wind," he said, voice clipped. "Feds raided his office empty. Someone tipped him." Nia nodded, unsurprised. The councilman was a snake, slithering through cracks she hadn't sealed yet. Her phone buzzed. A new message. No number. "This isn't over. Watch your back." She pocketed it, her resolve hardening. Downtown, the protests swelled again. A sea of voices clashing, some chanting her name like a hero, others cursing it like a curse. A news van rolled past, a reporter's voice cutting through. "Inspector General Nia Carter's crusade, justice or chaos?" She kept walking, the weight of her badge heavier than ever. At the safe house, she spread the surviving files across the table tapes, photos, a ledger tying Reed to offshore accounts. It was enough for another round, but not the knockout blow. Hargrove's sentencing was months away, his loyalists still out there, plotting. She traced a finger over the ledger, pausing on a name she didn't recognize. J. Carver. A new player? A ghost? The puzzle gnawed at her. That night, she stood on the safe house balcony, the Mississippi River glinting below. The city sprawled, beyond beautiful, broken, unyielding. She thought of Hargrove's first sneer in court, his mocking drawl. "Sweetheart, you're not foolin' nobody." He'd seen a girl, not a threat, because of her skin, her youth, her quiet. That blindness had been his downfall, and hers almost. Racism wasn't just in his words. It was in the system that buoyed him, the shadows that shielded Reed, the threats piling up in her inbox. A knock broke her reverie. Mills, holding a letter, slipped under the door. No stamp, just her name in jagged ink. Inside, a single line. "They're watching. Carver says hi." Her breath caught. Whoever this was, they knew her moves, her safe spots. She folded it, tucking it into her satchel. "Get the team," she told Mills. "We're not waiting." The next morning, she vanished from Memphis. No press, no trace. Rumors swirled. She'd resigned, gone rogue, been silenced. The protests ebbed, then flared anew when Hargrove's appeal was filed, his lawyer claiming entrapment. A grainy photo surfaced online. Nia boarding a train, destination unknown, her eyes sharp behind sunglasses. The caption read, "Where's the Inspector General?" Somewhere a train rattled through the night, Nia at a window, a new file open on her lap, J. Carver, circled in red. Memphis was behind her, but its lessons weren't. Hargrove's voice echoed in her mind. "More like me everywhere." And she knew he was right. The fight stretched beyond one city, one man, one victory. Ahead, the horizon glowed, faint and uncertain, hope, danger, or both. She closed the file, her lips curving slightly. The story wasn't hers to finish. It was the world's to wrestle with, one question at a time.